Hello everyone, my name is Stephen Cronledge. I'm a registered dietitian, personal trainer, and physiologist. And today we're going to be talking about carbohydrate needs for endurance-based activities, more specifically towards expeditions, long backpacking trips, maybe like a long biking trip through the mountains, all these types of things. This is going to be beneficial for that. So as far as regular guidelines go for our carbohydrate needs, when it comes to endurance-based events, let's say that 1 to 3 hour period, so maybe like a short hike or half marathon, or maybe like a 15-mile, 20-mile bike ride, something around that range, we're going to be shooting for 6 to 10 grams per kilogram of body weight in carbohydrates. When it comes to even longer events, so 2.5, 3 hours plus, we're going to want to hit between 8 to 12 grams per kilogram of body weight in carbohydrates. Now, this is going to be important to not only fuel our body, since carbohydrates are our main body source of energy, but make sure we don't get fatigued during the actual event. If we're not consuming enough carbohydrates, we're going to have an effect where our cognitive performance is going to go down. We might have some cramping, and definitely our energy levels are going to go down. So this is why carbohydrates are so important for these long expeditions, biking trips, all these other types of things. So when it comes to carbohydrate intake, we can talk about the prior to exercise carbohydrate intake, the during, and then the recovery. So there's going to be like 3 phases of carbohydrate intake. I would say the most important would probably be the during and the recovery, but as I'm going to discuss earlier, the pre also has a very big implication when it comes to fueling our performance when we're going out for that multi-day backpacking trip or multi-day hunting trip, multi-day bike packing trip, like cycling packing trip, any of these things. This is where it's going to become important. So before exercise, it is best to consume about 1 to 4 grams per kilogram of body weight and carbohydrates 1 to 4 hours before you start exercise. Now, this is important because when we first wake up in the morning, especially if you're starting your day at like 7, 8 a.m., maybe even 6 or 5, depending on when you want to start your trek. Having those carbohydrates is important because after an overnight fast, your body's pretty much gone through all of its carbohydrate stores. So now when you wake up, you're pretty much doing this exercise fasted. So you're going to be a little sluggish, a little tired throughout the thing. Your muscles might start to cramp a little bit earlier. But now if we have these carbohydrate intake first thing, prior to our trip, this is where we're going to see some beneficial effects with more energy. We are now having better cognitive performance because our mind isn't as sluggish. We're able to work a little bit faster during the actual trek. However, there is a caveat to this. Some individuals, not the majority, but some individuals experience hypoglycemia when they consume carbohydrates prior to exercise. And this is because as you consume these carbohydrates, your blood sugar goes up. So boop, boop, boop. And then as it's coming down, after your muscle cells and everything pull in the sugars they need, it could come down to baseline. But then with the onset of exercise, your muscle cells might pull in even more, or your body might use even more carbohydrate. And then now we see it going below that baseline. So here's baseline. No, our blood sugars go below here. And that is that hypoglycemia, that deficit in blood sugars. So it is a concern for some individuals to not do this. The only way best to do it is work with a dietitian or test it on yourself. Of course, have safety carbohydrates with you, whether it's a lollipop, candy bar, whatever it is, apple juice, whatever carbohydrate source you want. But again, not the majority, but some individuals do experience this, And in that case, maybe not having carbohydrates prior to exercise, but maybe have the carbohydrates during exercise might be beneficial. So in summary, prior to exercise, 1 to 1.4 grams per kilogram of body weight in carbohydrates, 1 to 4 hours before exercise. So if you have irritation that 1 hour before exercise of eating food, maybe push back your eating schedule to 2 to 3 hours before exercise. And hopefully this should help fuel your performance for the upcoming day. Now, when we go to during exercise, this is when carbohydrate intake, I think, is going to be very, very important, especially if you have a lot of fatigue, cramping, sluggishness as time goes on. And that's because as you exercise, your body's going to be using more carbohydrates. And if you've heard the term hitting the wall, like during a marathon, like we're around that 2.5, 3 hour mark, your body just like, it just feels like you just can't run anymore. That is because your body's run out of carbohydrates. So if we're doing like a long hike and we're hitting 3 to 4 hours and your body's hitting a wall, that's because you're running out of carbohydrates. So having these carbohydrates during the actual event or hike, bicycling trip, whatever, is going to be very important. So when it comes to the duration of your event, if we're doing 1 to 2 hours, we're looking at 30 grams of carbohydrates per hour. If we're doing about 2 to 3 hours, we're looking at 60 grams per hour of carbohydrates. And then if we're going 2.5, 3 hours plus, we're looking at 90 grams per hour of carbohydrates. Now this is due to the absorption rate of carbohydrates from your stomach into your bloodstream. All right. So your stomach and your intestines, well, all the absorption is really going on in your intestine. So when carbohydrates get to your intestine, there's an absorption rate of 1 to 1.2 grams per minute of carbohydrates from the intestine into the bloodstream. However, there is some evidence that if we diversify our carbohydrate intake, then we can see an even higher threshold for the amount of carbohydrates our body can utilize. So glucose, one type of carbohydrate, has an absorption, gets absorbed through the SGLT2 transporter. This is a protein that moves glucose from the intestine and into the bloodstream. Whereas fructose uses the GLUT5 transporter from the intestine into the bloodstream. So if we are having a combination of the two while we're exercising, then there is the possibility that we can consume above that threshold of 1 to 1.2. However, a majority of people are only going to be consuming that either consuming or not even hitting that amount because it's such a high amount of carbohydrates into their bloodstream. So this is more for like professional athletes, maybe ultra endurance runners, that kind of thing. If we're just looking at like our day-to-day hiking or backpacking trip, that kind of stuff, I would focus on that 30 to 60 grams per hour of carbohydrate intake. Definitely 30 on the minimum, but 60 would be, I would say, more adequate. Now this is something you're going to want to train your stomach for, because if you just go into whatever hike you're going to be doing or trek and bicycling trip and you're just going to just start eating 60 grams an hour, you're probably going to have stomach pain or nauseousness. You might even vomit. So this is something we want to train for. Maybe start with the small amount during like a 1 hour hike, see how you feel, and then work your way up to that 60 grams. But if you can't hit that 60, try to shoot for that 30. All right, so this would be like having 8 ounces of juice. That's gonna be like 30 grams of carbohydrates right there. Or 2 apples. Let's say you wanna have applesauce because it's quick and easy. You can go with that too. And then if you look at different types of candies, just look on the nutrition label in the back and figure out how much carbohydrates are per serving, and then you can use that as a gauge for how many carbohydrates you can consume. Or you can look at sport drinks or even gels to help you hit that carbohydrate intake, or test, see how it works with you, see how your body feels. But these carbohydrate sources are kind of like what we're looking at to maximize the amount of carbs we can consume while we exercise. Now, last but not least is recovery. Let's say you're doing a multi-day backpacking trip, or you're doing a cycling expedition, something like that, and you have like less than 8 hours. Even if you're exercising within 24 hours of that, I would really recommend consuming carbohydrates within 2 to 4 hours post exercise. And especially that first 2 hours, studies have shown that if you consume adequate carbohydrates in that first 2 hours, it's going to replenish your muscle's glycogen stores. Now, glycogen is going to be pretty much your glucose stores in your muscle that your body can use for later. So with consuming these carbohydrates within the first 2 hours of post-exercise, our body has a higher ability to maximize and replenish these glycogen stores, rather than if you wait till after 2 hours post-exercise to consume some carbohydrates or food in general. Now, the general recommendations for this is to consume 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight of carbohydrates for the first 2 hours or 2 to 4 hours. So if you can do the first 2 hours, great. If you can even extend that amount of consumption in the first 4 hours, even better. These are going to be for our ultra endurance events, though. Like I said, like if you're bicycling 100 miles one day, doing 100 miles the next day, this is where it's going to be keen. But majority of people are inexperienced expeditioners or travelers, whatever it is, they're not going to be able to consume this much. This is a ton of carbohydrates, a lot of carbohydrates at once. So let's say you're only able to consume 0.6 grams of carbohydrates per day. Per hour post-exercise, there is an additive macronutrient which you can pair with it to improve absorption. So if study has shown that if you have a 0.6 gram, or it was a 0.8 grams of carbohydrate intake post-exercise, another group had 0.8 grams of carbohydrates paired with protein, and then a third group had that 1 to 1.2 grams of carbohydrates post-exercise. And what they found is that 0.8 grams of carbohydrates by itself per kilogram body weight wasn't as effective in replenishing our glycogen stores as when you paired protein with it. And that's because the protein that was paired with it helped increase our insulin response, which was able to pull more blood sugar into our blood cells and consume it that way, and store it that way. However, the protein added with the carbohydrate was not as efficient as if we were able to hit that 1 to 1.2 grams of carbohydrate intake per hour post-exercise. So, this is just general advice right here, but in summary, when we're looking at recovery, especially if there's less than 8 hours between events or exercise, we want to consume within the first 2 hours 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. And if you can't hit that amount, we want to pair that with protein. Other than that, this is pretty much just a quick intro to carbohydrate intake for our expeditions, our hikes, our long distance events. I will be posting a more in-depth video for like the research, adding studies, and more the science behind it. But again, this is just general guideline to help us with our performance and energy levels while we exercise during a long event, especially since most of our good hikes are going to be that 4 to 5 hour period. And that's just a hike. So if you're doing backpacking, even more. So if you like this video and you want to learn more about how nutrition can impact your performance on the trail, on the bike, on an expedition, climbing, hunting, whatever it is, anything with the outdoors. Give this channel a subscribe and stay tuned. Thank you.